Good evening, everybody. And as a small introduction, I think that a little bit exercise of transparency is most welcome to avoid, to liberate a little bit, let's say, the discussion. And I hope to have like very strong and honest questions, but not statements, questions. And so as a starting point, I would just introduce my gallery from a business perspective, because I don't think that it's now, I don't think it's time now for self-promotion as a gallerist. And to speak about my artist, I think my programs speak by itself. So my gallery at the moment does a turnover of 1.8 million euros. And I make approximately 100 invoices a year. And I still consider myself as a non-profit business, because at the end of the year, we have a profit of 5,000 or 8,000 euros, and I think it describes pretty much the world where we are in. There are some galleries who have like a smaller turnover, and make more profit. So I think it's interesting to think that I don't know about these big galleries, etc., business, but I suspect that many galleries are just the same. You can grow commercially. It doesn't mean that you generate profit. And I would like to present a couple of things. First, I would like to speak a little bit about how I see the art market. Then I would like to redefine and precise my vision of the role of the gallery. And then I would like to finish giving a little bit my recipes or answers to this world which is very competitive, and then I will try to be very specific about what I'm doing. I don't know if it works with somebody else, but at least it was, for me, very helpful to work this way. So the art market, yes, I think it's a completely reactionary place, and that the aesthetics values carried by the market are very old-fashioned, and the role of the gallery is also to change it. I would give you some, it's not only like an abstract vision I have. I think, for instance, I represent, at the moment at the gallery, I show performance artist Prince Golam. I have to say there is no market, or almost no market, for performance art, because what you sell is a score. So all this bullshit about important art is very valuable. I mean, there are lots of artistic practice which are not on the market, or which are really very hard to commercialize. Performance is one thing. I think there are a couple of collections now, institutions that start to look at performance from the collection perspective, and I think it's most welcome. But I've been working with this artist since 10 years now, and their market is very complex to build, and I'm very interested in building it, because I think I'm not against the market, I just want to change it, which is very different. And so performance art is something you also don't see at art fairs, and I had also like very active and passionate debates with art fair people who try to integrate performance with the same business model as sculpture or painting in the art fairs, somehow to create entertainment in the show. And I think it doesn't work. I think the art fairs or the galleries should pay the performance to give like a cultural life to a commercial event, and not ask the galleries to pay for the space and after to produce a performance with the artists. But I made some very interesting experiments with performance and art fairs. I can speak about it later. Then video art is also something we never speak about. All these numbers we saw this morning, like auction houses, results, etc., all these statistics, they give a very wrong vision of the art market also, because it integrates only a certain category of artworks. Actually, lots of objects, I don't consider myself most of the time as artworks. I mean, we all have the freedom to decide, yeah, this for me, an artwork, this is maybe not an artwork. It's not because it's in the catalog of Christie's that it's an artwork. And another category of artistic production, let's say, which is not really present in the market, the collaborative works. Sometimes the most fascinating things I've seen in museums or trying to educate myself through art history are like collaborative works done by several artists, they are very hard to commercialize. And I think it shows also that the market is still, the art market is still globally working with the very strange ideological figures. For instance, the fact also that most very expensive artists are Germans also says a lot about the capacity of Germany to generate heroic figure, and the artist as a hero and the artwork as a proof of delivering something which is about power. It's something which is very dominant in the market. Then there is another myth you have in the art market, is the myth of quality. All the dealers from the world, they always speak about the quality. This is quality, etc. It's a little bit like good taste and bad taste. Huh? I consider personally that the bad taste is the taste of the author. Huh? And I think everybody has the same feeling, and the quality is always what you do, and bad quality is what others do. And when you look also about like an important tableau, an important work, it's always also related to the size. I don't believe in it. I think sometimes a very small Cézanne could be historically more relevant than a big painting, than the one that was acquired by this big oil family. So, and we can debate about Cézanne if you want, but I would not go for this specific work, even if it looks like a poster. And so you have very specific characteristics of artworks which are like successful on the market, but I think it's really our responsibility and our responsibility as gallerists when we interact with collectors or potential collectors not to play the game of this value. I think we can really promote art, which is difficult and demanding, and without always using these categories of importance or not importance, while we have very little historic knowledge to really determine. I think the historical work has not been done for the last 50 years, or not done correctly, and there will be major re-evaluations. I don't know if many of these big names, I don't know if Gerhard Richter is an important artist. Personally, I don't think so. But I'm not saying he's a bad artist, but for me, there are many more important things that have been done the last 50 years in art that really change our vision and our definition of the art. And then my second point is the role of the gallery. There is this kind of, I've been working in different businesses before. And for instance, I was working in the publishing business, like working for an art publisher for years. And somehow I heard this morning that, okay, the gallery is like being like a provider or whatever. I think the gallery is really working on a very long chain. If, for instance, you look at the book, the publishing business, you have the author, which could be compared to the artist. You have afterwards the publisher. You have the agent in most cases, like the literature agent. You have the publisher. Then you have the diffuser who works with, who has salespeople who works with bookshops, the bookshop, and then the client. So it's a whole chain which is protected by contract, by the way. But I also think that in the gallery business we work with contracts. I don't understand why we always speak about not having contracts. We have a contract. It doesn't need to be written to be a contract. And this is by law. I think there is a business model that galleries use. We have a contract. And then it could be broken, like any contract could be broken, and then life goes on. But there is a contract, there is a model that I would like to discuss also later. And I don't oppose another thing also, to kill a little bit of the cliché, a few of the cliché I sometimes hear. I think that this cut between the profit and non-profit world is totally artificial. I think that many museums, Getty to start with, they are selling tickets. Most of the big museums, they are now they depend on politics, especially in Spain, and I'm sure they are like counting how many tickets entries did you have, etc. So I don't feel that the line between what is commerce and not commercial is very easy to define. Many people are complaining also about the fact that you have not so many people going to galleries. I think it's a great thing, because if the galleries would be packed by tourists, they would not function as art spaces. So I'm very glad to have just enough of the audience I can deal with before having to think about selling tickets. By the way, there was an artist who was Gustave Doré in the late 19th century, had a gallery in London, and to view the work, you had to buy a ticket. So it's maybe an interesting business models for the ones who are really interested in the spectacle. And then I heard also something this morning about the role of the gallery, or like this idea that it's now being difficult to turn, quoting Bourdieu, which is really very interesting, to turn a symbolic capital to financial capital. And I think this would be a disaster. I think the work of the gallery is not to accumulate symbolic capital or steal symbolic capital while working with curators or artists most of the time. I think, or if it's not to turn symbolic capital to financial capital, to turn it to power or to influence. I mean, we can all imagine examples. I think the real work of the gallery, from my perspective, is to help the artist to find his position in the context of the artistic production of our times. Somehow, from, like, you can also say it differently, to create a desire around the work is also part of the gallery business. It means also to create a market for the artist, even if the market is reluctant to certain productions. But it is intrinsically the role of the gallery, to help the artist to find his position, to create a desire and to create an audience for the art. And this idea of the audience is something I'm very interested in, because the last years we all hear about these big galleries opening a new space here and there, but you can see the parking lot in the Bourget is very much empty. And so those are not galleries, they are very big showrooms. For me, what defines a gallery is the interaction with the audience. I mean, I'm not criticizing it. I don't care if it exists. It's maybe a good thing. I'm not opposing what I'm doing to very big galleries, but you have to be careful, because I think, for instance, Gagosian does absolutely fantastic shows, especially when it's about historical artists. And I appreciate, like, looking at Manzoni. At his gallery, the show was much better than the one I saw in Frankfurt, like the last summer. So it's not that these mega galleries are not entreprises culturelles, that they are not producing culture. Sometimes they do, and it has to be respected. And the very young galleries are not necessarily doing something interesting just because they are, like, in the underground. So I'm very skeptical about these hierarchies between the big mean galleries and the young innocent ones. At first, the big mean ones used to be innocent ones when they started. So, or at least many of them. So we have to look at the parcours, and sometimes you have great shows generated by very commercial galleries, and a very weak neo-conceptual shows done by pretentiously artist-oriented galleries. So for me, these categories, they are much more complex. But what is for sure is that at the moment there is a tremendous competition, and we have a quantity issue. I don't think that the models are so different now than they used to be. Also, we have been we heard this morning about these tremendous changes, etc. I don't think that there are so huge changes. I don't think that the collector nowadays is so different from the one 100 years ago, that the buyer of nowadays is different from the one of... I'm not so convinced that we live in a completely different environment. I think it's a cliche, and we have to be very critical towards it. I think the scale changed, but we have also more inhabitants on the planet now than 100 years ago. It doesn't mean that the whole system, the government, and that everything has changed. The scale has changed, but it's quite natural. The scale of everything has changed. And so it means that we have a more open, globalized art world. but the art world was also already globalized far before most of the industries. I think if you look at Matisse, the main collectors were in Russia at the beginning of the 20th century, not in Paris. And this diffusion, or the Barnes collections, etc. There are hundreds of examples to show you that there was already an international distribution of the avant-garde 100 years ago. So, but the competition is different. And I think as a mid-level gallery, as I qualify myself from a business perspective, I worked a lot with collaborations. One of the models I've been working with is this villa project that was initiated by Raster Gallery from Warsaw. At first, they did, I think it was 6-7 years ago, they did invite in a very beautiful old villa falling apart in Warsaw many fellow galleries to do a project there. So we did a kind of festival, which is in a certain, it was non-profit, a festival in Warsaw. Many galleries I'm friends with, Zero Gallery from Milano, many galleries worked on this project. Then we decided also in 2008 or 9 to develop a kind of Chelsea gallery district in Reykjavik for the time of a summer. And we did it with talks, screenings, performances, and we learned a lot from this kind of experience. The last one was in Tokyo. So we did we did occupy a series of empty office spaces. I went there with 2 artists I'm working with. We did site-specific projects, etc. I also think that another collaborative model is like the gallery exchange. It's a very classic formula. I am very attached to it. I think it's a wonderful way to penetrate a different reality and to learn from a colleague. I did it this year with Labor Gallery from Mexico. I did it before with Silvia Dauder here in Barcelona, who did a project in my gallery. I did a project in her space. I also shared very often, I know that Victor Gisler did it also in the past, so I'm not saying that I invented anything, but I did share my booth at many art fairs with different galleries. And I think it's always very interesting to work with a colleague and to create a small exhibition in an art fair. By the way, I consider that I like art fairs because you can do exhibitions there. You are not condemned to just show works from a cynical and boring perspective. No one impeached the galleries to really play with this new, let's say, it's a new media to deal with, and one can be creative. Sometimes I fail. Sometimes I do awful things, sometimes wonderful things, I think. But at least it's a very interesting medium for the galleries, because this is the medium of the galleries, not the one of the artist. And sometimes it's interesting to really take position and to play a little bit with the works we know about, while at the gallery we have much more we much more depend on what the artist wants to do with the space. So it's not necessarily so interesting for me to accompany an artist who already knows what he wants to do. So lots of collaborations to share artists. It's also a reality since the very beginning since the modern promotion gallery emerged in the 60s, but it's also a way of associating energies and working together. And I have also to say, because we sometimes see the gallery world as a kind of shark pond, I think there is lots of solidarity. There is a solidarity chain in the gallery business that maybe doesn't exist for the artist anymore. I have to say that I started 10 years ago in a small space in Belleville. I didn't even know what art collector looks like. I never met any in my life before. And I've known afterwards that I've been supported by many galleries who somehow started from scratch like me. And whenever you start as a gallery now, if you really are authentically looking for building your own program, there will be lots of people supporting you. And I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's still a very idealistic field. And I'm very thankful towards the galleries who are helping me. And I try to do the same for the next generation of galleries, especially in my area in Belleville, the northeast Paris. And I think it's also interesting to work in an environment which is not a bourgeois environment. I'm very attached to the idea of the gallery as a space where people can go in and out, which is not a showroom, where you are not rejected because you don't know this or that, which is really about dialoguing with the audience. And I think it doesn't really exist elsewhere than in the Western world so far, because it's a cultural practice that took 100 years to come, and it has really it's a very precious thing. And we cannot just, when I go to Mexico, there are wonderful galleries, but it's not the same. They are not open to students. It's not, you don't have the same social practice around it. It will take lots of time, and I really want to preserve that. And I don't think that there is a problem with the audience at the moment. I think there are lots of people who are going to galleries who really do a program. If you start to use your space to do a kind of showroom, of course you don't have any audience. And I read there was a big article in Le Monde recently saying, people, the collectors go to art fairs instead of galleries. I think they go more to galleries than they used to do, so I don't think that it's so much true. And you have lots of other people who go to galleries, and if they are not welcomed properly, of course they won't come back, or if they see boring things, they won't come back. So I think the responsibility of the audience is very much the responsibility of the gallery. And I think for the mid-level galleries, we probably cannot afford a huge space to please the artist. Actually, it's not to please the artist, it's to have more works than the competition. And but you can provide an audience that these mega galleries cannot provide. And so this is for free. It depends on you. I think the idea that I wanted to offer my artists the possibility to exhibit in 2,000 square meters. At the moment, there are so many places worldwide where international artists can exhibit that they don't need the space from the gallery. But the gallery can provide an audience with a specific quality of mediation, which you won't find in any museum or biennial. And I also wanted to speak about other things I did the last years. I also co-founded a gallery in Berlin, somehow as a protective shield to avoid seeing my most successful artists being stolen by other galleries. So it was my response to the success of some of my artists to really build a project in a partnership with friends. The name of this gallery is KOW in Berlin. I think it's also, then when you start to, at a certain level, a gallery starts to you really need to operate professionally. And I want my collectors, or the collectors who trust me, to get the same service as they would get from a very, very wealthy and established gallery. And to be able to do that, you need at a certain point to work with more established artists. And it's very refreshing to work also with different generations. So I started to work with two older artists, Franz Erd Walter, who is an artist who started developing his work in the late 50s. And he's very close to us, and he's really generous. And also more recently with William Anastasi, who is a kind of artist from New York, one of the very first conceptualists, whose work is not so known so far. But it means there is lots of space also for young galleries to work with more established artists who also need to have a more privileged relationship with a gallery which is not working with 20,000 other artists. So I think there is lots of possibilities for a gallery to really grow without only growing with the space. I think the growth of a gallery comes from consolidating the program and also having more means working with more established artists. So it's another response. Then I would also like to speak about the identity of the galleries. Absolutely, the very heart of a gallery is the program. So you have to be completely dedicated to make it grow, to make it also understandable by other people. And I think the key is really the program. If it's attractive, people will come. And the art market, from my perspective, is also an offer market. So if you really have something like very interesting artists, you will be able to find or develop a market for them. And the key element is the price. We don't discuss it so much, but one way to compete with like more very giant businesses, you have to be more competitive. So you have to offer artists to have like a very strong background and career for less money. And then if the collectors prefer to buy less established artists for more money, it's not my problem anymore. And then as a kind of conclusion, because I really would like to discuss with the audience about all these matters, I think that the very weak point of our ecosystem is the current business model of the artist-gallery relationship. I think that at the moment you maybe all know that artists and contemporary galleries share 50-50 the revenue of a sale. But on one hand, for many artists, especially since they gave up financing their production, it's pocket money. And on the other side, it's really financing a business, which is a promotion agency. So I think this business model is not working so well. I don't know if it will last. I just know that it was not like this all the time. I mean, I'm not nostalgic. I think in the 70s, the galleries were not really producing artworks as they do now, but the artists were constantly selling from the studio. So it was a different problem. And in Paris, there is one gallery, Louis Carré, which is the only one I know that still is working with a different business model. They buy the art at the studio, keep them in the stock, and sell them later. This is the previous model you had with the very first contemporary art galleries. But I think this idea of this model of the business model between the gallery and the artist, it could change. It has changed previously, it could change again. But what I see is that the most reactionary forces you have now in the contemporary art world are these big mogul artists who are not actually supporting a younger generation, which is also quite unprecedented. Many artists in the past used to really, whenever they were like quite wealthy, collecting younger artists, supporting younger artists, it still exists, but at a very small level. And I don't think that there is so much, I would like to kill a little bit the myth of this, I think at the moment most of the power in the art world is concentrated by artists and not by galleries. This is my perspective. I think that at the moment, like even the most important galleries, they are terrified about losing one or two or three of their artists who make 80% of their turnover. I think in almost every gallery, the turnover comes from only a few artists. So we are extremely fragile. We try to compete to really not work and be like the puppet of one or two artists. But that's a very difficult issue nowadays for galleries, whatever level you are. It's the same for anyone. We have the same pressure from the artists who really want to be dominant in the ecosystem of the gallery at the moment. You're welcome to ask questions.
You hear me? So I'm a fan of the gallery, as you know, but I've got a few in your presentation, some contradiction that you'd like you to clarify. Because at the beginning of the presentation, you said nothing has changed in the last 100 years in the gallery system most of the time.
I didn't say that. I said that one has to be critical about the change.
Yeah.
Or this idea that it's not granted, this idea that everything has changed.
No.
That's what I said.
Okay, good. So that you're clarifying one contradiction there, because at the end you said that the business model with the 50-50 between the gallery and the artist was not sustainable, and certainly it's probably true, and that's putting a lot of pressure on the gallery system as a whole. Then one thing you said, there's a very great solidarity between the galleries and great great relationship between them. Then can you detail a bit what happened, why you had to open a gallery in Germany to defend an artist against someone poaching it? Or maybe the relationship is not that solidary anymore. And then you said to start, you said, I'm happy that there are not too many people going to my gallery. And then you said, but it's very important that the large public get access to art in one way or another. So
it's a balance. I mean, there is a difference between selling. I mean, if you go to, I cannot go to the Louvre anymore because it's packed by tourists all the time. So I have really the feeling that several cultural institutions have been confiscated by economic lobbies to sell hotel rooms, etc. And so there are really cultural institutions that don't function as cultural institutions anymore because you cannot interact with the art properly anymore. So it's a question of balance. It's not black and white. It's always in the gray that you see. Having to build an audience is one thing. To be like having like a huge crowd is a problem. And I think that one of the reasons this Art Basel Fair works so well is because it's also not too crowded. If you would have the same audience as in Arco, it would not work business-wise. So it's always a question of balance. You need to really have a very, you need to provide an audience to a show, otherwise it's not an exhibition and it's a private project. So it's part of the responsibility of the gallery to build an audience, but it doesn't mean that you have to be constantly gesticulating or making huge events to have a maximum of visitors. It's quality versus quantity. So for me, it's perfectly coherent.
And about the German case?
The German case is something else. I think it's not because I think when you start to, after a couple of years in the gallery system, you cannot access the best art fairs. So what you automatically see is that if you do your job correctly, some of your artists will grow and be visible, and they will be represented by much bigger galleries, and then they use these marketplaces to distribute those artists, most of the time to your clients, who come to see you. Ah, fantastic, I saw this artist you told me about 2 years ago. I just bought a piece from your colleague, and then you are not in the fair. So you have a distortion in the competition that you have to deal with. But when you pass this stage, and when you have somehow like the same access to art fairs, then this problem doesn't exist anymore. I think at every level of the gallery, of the development of the gallery, you have to face new challenges, and you have to find a response. So the response at this time was also to develop another project in Berlin to promote some of the artists I'm working with, Clemens von Wedemeyer, Franz Ernst Walter, to contextualize them instead of having someone just making business with them. But I carefully also chose some partnerships with colleagues I'm competing with. For instance, for the case of Franz Ernst Walter, there were many interesting, so it's also a question of humility. You know that if you're working with an artist, it's quite important. You need partners. You cannot just do it by yourself. At least I don't think that you do it. It's not in the interest of the artist. And then after you cannot complain if the artist leaves. So you need also to provide the best you can and not necessarily all by yourself. So I contacted Peter Freeman in New York with a gallery who has lots of secondary market experience that I don't have, and I thought that for an artist who is in his 70s, this experience and expertise of the secondary market is valuable, and we needed it. So of course I lose some business, but we can also control or develop the market of this artist more efficiently. So it's it's not black and white. Sometimes you have to organize competition with yourself just to avoid losing control. Sylvia?
No, I just wanted to say that I totally agree with what you said on how it is very possible for a gallery, it doesn't matter what size or what level of gallery, to do really interesting exhibitions in art fairs. This is something possible, and I encourage all the galleries here and the ones even who are not here to really think about this, which is the art fair is not only pure market, it's also a projection of what you do in the gallery every day. And together with this is if we didn't have exhibitions in the gallery, if we did not have interact with an audience, we would not be accepted in any art fairs. That's one of the main rules that, as far as I know, hasn't changed yet. Now one question. Do you think the place where a gallery is, at least in Western countries, plays a role in the possible success or interaction or growing or developing? Is it the same opening a gallery in Brussels, Berlin, Paris, Barcelona, Madrid right now?
Yeah, it's a complex question. I cannot really, at first I don't have an expertise about every city in the world. I just see differences and I try to analyze them as show. And then so I think at the moment I see the gallery scene in Brussels as much more bourgeois and less interesting than in Berlin or in Paris. I think at the moment there are not so many galleries that run a very experimental program, but it may change. But at the moment I don't think that's really the place. I think you need really also context. I think if the galleries are not challenged by very bright and daring institutions, it's very difficult to do a program if you're the only ones. I don't think it's so interesting. I think we need desperately to compete also, artistically speaking, with cultural institutions or what we call non-profit cultural institutions. I think we, galleries, benefit a lot from this environment. And if it's only like a commercial environment, I think it's more difficult to really have interesting shows. It's one of the answers. I think it depends a lot on the environment. But there are also some differences. I think in London, I don't like either the gallery scene so much. I think you have big galleries, but I find it still much more interesting in Berlin when I see exhibitions. But the institutions, so it's a contradiction because the context in terms of institutions, I would say, is much stronger in London. It's one of the best, I think, in the world. But it's maybe too early to really produce the audience that galleries need to grow. So it's a very complex thing, and it changes all the time. It varies from one place to the other, and that's very fascinating to see that this the cultural role of galleries is really, sometimes it dies in places where you have like a huge tradition for it. In some places in Germany, where you have now this new phenomenon of the birth of a cultural capital. It's new for the country, and I think it's not so good for the art world in general, but that's a fact, and it generates lots of holes, emptiness in several places, and then you have Berlin that goes more and more interesting. So I think it really changes, and it doesn't mean that it's not because you have like drastic cultural changes in a place that you necessarily, as a mirror immediate effect, have like the birth of an interesting artistic life and production. So I think it's very hard to describe and to analyze so far. I just see that in several emerging countries, there is really a resistance to the idea. There is not this tour du samedi après-midi when you have like lots of people touring galleries on Saturday afternoon. And I think it's such a fantastic thing. And it exists in Paris, it exists in several other places, but it doesn't exist everywhere where you have suddenly this boom or pseudo-boom. I don't know if there is such a boom, because I don't know the numbers, and I don't trust any of the numbers I've seen. I mean, I don't know if there are like billions of, like millions of contemporary art collectors in China. I'm not so sure. I don't know any of them, at least. I don't know. So all these numbers which are reflecting the secondary market results, they don't reflect the reality of the primary market. And almost nobody knows what's really going on. Yeah, maybe one person who is very well informed is the accounting officer of the French galleries, who is working with all the galleries. He knows, but he would not tell you anything. So maybe you should invite him, but I'm sure he will not speak, even if you try to torture him. So there are some people who know, and those people, they protect the knowledge about what's going on in the market. It's really secret.
Hello. Just regarding the expense of attending art fairs for galleries, is there anything that art fairs could do to become more gallery-centric and really make you feel like you're gaining value from the cost of participation?
I think it's a very good point, very good question, because I think art fairs, which are at first creations of galleries, have the capacity of either really promote content-oriented galleries that really do an effort in terms of making an exhibition at the fair, or they can hide them next to the toilets at the very end of the hall. So there is a power, there is like really a possibility for art fairs to really play and push either one side or the other of the, I think art fairs really have this power at the moment, but art fairs are, most of them, I think all the ones I know about, they are working closely with galleries. So it's not the art fairs against the galleries. I think most of the art fairs are associated with galleries, but of course, where you are placed in a fair will determine lots of your turnover at a gallery. At FIAC, some people were really shocked to suddenly see spectacle galleries that have no history with the fair, who just come for the first time and being given the best spot in the fair. So personally, I do understand the reasons behind, but I think that's really something that could determine a lot of your success or loss at a fair. Thank you very much. Do you have like a last question or not? Georgina will decide.
Well, thank you for your talk. I was just wondering, you talk about the collaboration with younger galleries and that you've been nurtured by older galleries. Can you maybe a bit elaborate on that? How does it work for you?
I mean, it's also related to the art fairs, but you have like several examples. Suddenly you have a collector who comes to your place and you hear like maybe 1 year after that he was told about your gallery by another one. That's an example. And it happened to me a lot. Or even to have colleagues coming with a collector to your space. It also happened to me. And then suddenly you are in a big prestigious art fairs where you didn't know anyone, but people knew you. So it's another example. I think most of the system of integrating art fairs is cooptation. So if no one wants to have you, then you're out. But if you have like the selection committee decides to, I mean, I've been working in the FIAC selection committee with Kamel, so that's how we know each other. And so you really have, as a gallery, or at least during the time of your presence in the committee, you have somehow a certain power to support or not to support. And it doesn't mean that you, and I think almost all the art fairs do it. So it could be then you also get advice also from more established galleries. I've been working a lot, for instance, just to name a few, with Galerie Nexam Stefan in Vienna, which is a very established gallery, but she gave me lots of advice, how to do things. When you start in a business, I never did any internship or whatever in a gallery, so when I started, I didn't have a clue about how it is working. So you need to get good advice, and not twisted advice. It's very valuable. And what to do, how to introduce yourself in an art fair, how to deal with this, you can really get it from colleagues if they feel that you are doing something which is interesting for the audience. It sounds very idealistic, but at least it's my experience.
So thank you so much. That was really a wonderful talk.